Hey folks, got a really exciting episode today, but just wanted to let you know we have a website now. By the time you're listening to this, socialistshelf.com is live. That is socialistshelf.com. Right now, not a lot going on there outside of our episodes, but we will be publishing writings on there from ourselves and maybe some other really cool authors. We've got bios for ourselves. And honestly, it's just going to be a cool hub for our work, especially since we can't really trust the social media companies right now. We got to have our own little space. So, it's nothing special, but I hope y'all will check it out. I hope y'all will enjoy it. I hope you'll enjoy the stuff we put up on there. And also, thank you so much to the people who donated to help us sort of buy that domain name and get it. We really appreciate it. And turns out socialistshelf.com was available for purchase. So we have that. Lenore, any thoughts before we get to the episode?
No, from you nailed it, and from the bottom of my heart, thank y'all so much for investing in this, for staying with us for this journey. Some of you have been here from the beginning, some of you who are maybe this is your first episode, which hell of a first one.
Oh my God.
But yeah, no, we're excited to have you here. We're happy to build this with y'all, and thank you for getting on the ground floor of the sixth website on the internet.
Socialistshelf.com. Don't forget it. Now to the episode.
What I wanted was to die among strangers, untroubled, beneath a cloudless sky, and yet my desire differed from the sentiments of that ancient Greek who wanted to die under the brilliant sun. What I wanted was some natural, spontaneous suicide. I wanted a death like that of a fox, not yet well versed in cunning, that walks carelessly along a mountain path and is shot by a hunter because of its own stupidity.
Why do you want
Real,
that though?
yeah, real ambitious here, Mr. Mishima. You want to unpack that? Oh, not like that, please. No, 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 no.
Yeah. Yeah, he unpacked it for the world to see, as we'll get into. But I love that. I want to die like a stupid fox. Like what are you talking about?
Like crazy like a fox, suave like a fox. In the terms of things that you want to be like a fox on, this is new to me. This
Well, I guess we found out what the fox says.
Socialist shelf. Be good goods and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Be good goods and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome back to the Socialist Shelf. It is time to get Mishima pilled. Lenore, I know you're here to get Mishima pilled.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one because like I was never quite online or educated enough to get what people on lefty slash politics slash history Twitter were talking about when they brought up Yukio Mishima. So I'm gonna learn today because like Ryan knows, but I'm decidedly unfamiliar with this strange man.
He is a strange man. And so I'm gonna say this at the top. I really wish I could say Mishima is my I can fix him because he was a genuinely very attractive man. I could not. A lot of people tried. So I'm going to give the bio and you can determine for yourself. But this guy's a piece of work, I gotta say. And today we're going to be talking about Confessions of a Mask, which is like his first breakout work. But I'm going to be talking about his life in totality. One, because Confessions of a Mask, you can almost see the trajectory of what happens in his life in this book because it is basically an autobiography. Um, and secondly, because it's just so fucking fascinating. So I do have a background with Mishima, not yeah, it may sound like we like dated in college or something. No, I do have a background with Mishima. I read Confessions of a Mask and some of his stuff like Sun and Steel.
You
And
hooked up with him once, you didn't date him.
No, God, yeah, I still have the scars from an international literature class in college, and it was a class that was like, we're gonna do the hits from like the last 150 years of international literature. So like Mishima was on there, and we were all over the place, just back and forth and back.
He has a stature in Japanese literature that is perhaps outsized, like in terms of just what conclusions I come to about him reading this. Like Jacob, you described him to me, or maybe it was Ryan, as a gay fascist who was bad at being gay and bad at being a fascist.
That's exactly correct. But I'll talk about him, but because he was really good at writing. Yukio
That's
Mishima.
undeniable. Yeah.
Yeah, Yukio Mishima was born Kimatake Hiroka, but he would not go by that for most of his life. And born in 1925 in Tokyo to a father who was a minor agricultural and commerce official and a mother from a long line of academics. You're going to note when we get to talking about the book, a lot of this early stuff is going to sound similar. It's because it's the same story. On his father's side, he is actually a descendant of the Tokugawa shogunate founders, one of the founders
Really?
of the shogunate, but they had sort of declined significantly since then. His grandfather had been involved in all sorts of imperial missions in China, and they
Oh
just kind
God.
of had declined from that day. Not to say that they weren't doing well for themselves, but they were in not so nice a neighborhood, but they were in the nicest house in the not nice neighborhood. They had
With
tons of
six
maids,
servants, yeah.
yeah, tons of servants. And he was essentially raised by his grandmother, which again is straight out of this book. She was, I think the book doesn't even get into how quite obsessive this grandmother was. She would not let him touch the sunlight. She did not want him playing sports. She did not want him exercising. She did not want him engaging in anything that could be seen as masculine in any way. She
Seems
only
healthy.
wanted him to interact with women and play with dolls. Something the book doesn't talk about, though, that really is an interesting counter side of this, is that at age 12, his father took him back and put him through a rigorous manliness regime, including serious physical abuse, including once or twice holding him up to a moving train mere inches away from it, nearly killing him, and going through his room regularly, purging it of all things that seemed unmanly, including his original writings that he first wrote in his early teens and
You
early.
know, normal stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So he had this childhood where he was not allowed to even like live like a guy and was like isolated. And then he's like, you have to be the most manly man. I'm gonna start destroying like your homework because I decided that that was, unmanly or
But I
whatever.
can't do that right now because it's train day.
Yeah, but also screaming at him when he didn't get good grades because he wanted him to be a lawyer. Obviously, quite an unbalanced situation here. His mother was quite supportive of him. However, she had to do it in secret. It seems she was quite scared of this man who was running the house this way. But
Really? Why is that?
yeah, the train comes for us all. But she actually supported his work, would read his writings when he wrote them as a kid, would hide them for him, and was is very supportive. Was kind of a bright spot in his life. She also helped him get really into theater in his early teens, and this is when he became obsessed with literature and poetry, especially Japanese waka poetry and German writings. He learned to speak and read German at this time and became obsessed with one Nietzsche. So, or Nietzsche, I can never say that.
Wonderful, wonderful starting point for a
Yeah.
most normal person of all time. He's a theater kid too.
Yes, massive theater kid, really into kabuki theater, really into a lot of the traditional stuff, but he was interested in a number of things. However, even from a young age, newer stuff he was skeptical of because he said it smacked of Marxism. We'll get into that. He's like a 14-year-old, like this smacks of Marxism, which he was taught that, of course, but at a certain point in your life, you do have to own that, which he does get to that.
You and I smack of Marxism, and we turn out fine.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure he would feel the same. Mishima, at age 16, pins his first short story, which is pinned under the pen name Mishima, which comes from the local train station he had to pass through every day, and Yukio, which comes from Yuki, the word for snow, because it was snowy outside when he submitted it. He would then go by that for the rest of his life.
Hi, I'm cold day on which I was almost killed by a train. Nice to
Yeah,
meet you.
the train thing is interesting, and it's interesting because in this book too, like he says, "Why do I never have happy experiences on trains?" in this book, which like really hits when you consider that. Uh,
Which, yes, but also like there's stuff in here that he gets up to on the train. Not what you think, but just that is his own fault.
100%. And he was supported in this submission by a mentor and teacher of his named Hansuda Zenmai, who was his supporter who taught him to write in a lot of ways and was also a massive imperialist who had been fighting in China since, a young age back in the 20s and 30s, taking a brief stint as a professor before returning to the Chinese front in the late 30s. As he left for the war, he told Mishima, "I trust the entire future of Japan to you," which Mishima said those words haunted him for the rest of his life, especially when he found out Zenmai would die in the war. Interestingly enough, 4 days after the war ended, Zenmai was trying to keep the fighting continued. Like he was trying to continue the war, and nobody really wanted that. So Zenmai
He was
killed
doing
his
an Andrew Jackson.
yeah, he killed his commanding officer and then killed himself. So, Mishima had some basis there.
Really,
Um,
really, really stellar role models in his life.
yeah, really. Mishima was drafted, but given second class status because he had a cold that was misdiagnosed as tuberculosis. Again, just in the book.
For the
Um,
time, not a bad guess.
No, not at all. It is debated whether he was lying. In the book, the character is lying. He knows damn well he doesn't have tuberculosis. Some people are like, is Mishima making a confession? We're not really sure. There's no way to know. But this would drive Mishima to be obsessed with bodybuilding later in his life, because he felt deeply insecure that he had that second class rank. He had a long running relationship, not long running, but a sort of fling with a girl named Kuniko, and then around the same, and who he then could not get up the gumption to marry. His sister died around this time. He was forced into law school and worked at the Treasury Department before quitting because he was depressed. So again, it's just the last parts of the book all happened to him. And because, as you may have picked up, this man is a homosexual. Mishima is gay, and like even his early writings, like before Confessions of a Mask, are all like short stories about like how it was acceptable to be gay in like ancient Greece, and actually that was manly and
He's a
stuff like that.
he's big on Greece.
He was big on Greece. He in fact visited there as soon as he got any kind of money.
Oh wow. Wait, when was this? Did he make his visit? What happened
Right
then
after
after the war?
right after Confessions of a Mask comes out, so like
Mm.
1950. It's so interestingly enough, he starts working as a writer full time in the late 40s, and he becomes a staunch anti-communist at this point. And at this point, he is an adult. He does have to live up to his own actions. Much of the artistic community at this point starts embracing socialism as an alternative because they feel like, well, they're like, well, we hate America. We realize this went poorly. We're socialists, and he was really, really against that, and was a big ratting people out and whatnot.
Mm.
Um,
The
and
sort of person who would have turned in Takiji Kobayashi.
yes, in 1948, he publishes Thieves, his first novel, which is a book about aristocrats killing themselves. Nobody really cared about this one.
We need more of those.
Yes, no, honestly. But then in 1949, Confessions of a Mask comes out and makes him a national celebrity at the age of 24. I mean, this book is huge, and people are like incensed and outraged by it, by a lot of it, but then people love it. The left loves it because of this like sort of this subversion and the way it talks about war. The right wing like actually loves it because of its nationalistic elements and because of who they know this guy Mishima to be. And they're like, well, there's all this debate. It's translated into English and people love it in the United States. This shit like goes crazy. He all of a sudden becomes a celebrity. And we're certainly not going to talk about all the books and plays and stuff he wrote, but it's worth noting over his career, he publishes 34 novels, 50 plays, 25 collections of short stories, 35 books of essays, an opera, and a movie. So, like,
Wow.
he would go on to write and write and write and write. And of course, this is where Confessions of a Mask hits, which is what we'll talk about, but I do want to go through the rest of his life because it's important. He begins to travel, writes literature based on ancient Greece. He writes some stuff based on Greco-Japanese aesthetics, a thing he, I think, made up. And this is
I
where the
was
fascist allegations start getting thrown out by people.
Greco-Japanese. That's I mean, Alexander got as far east as like India.
Yeah.
Like it's not inconceivable that maybe somebody was sailing around from like Japan and like maybe encountered some kind of Hellenic influence, but like it's a real stretch.
He just thought it would be cool, basically.
I mean, and he's not wrong.
Yeah. He gets really into weight training and katana mastery around this time. If you're interested in that, read Sun and Steel, which is his like famous essay about how every Japanese person should learn to use the katana and stuff.
Study
He
the
also,
blade.
yes, he also gets really into UFOs, manga, and kaijus around this time. He becomes obsessed with Godzilla when it comes out and describes himself as feeling much like Godzilla's own egg. He doesn't really elaborate on that much.
Well, because the thing of it is, like, I mean, Godzilla is the specter of nuclear war,
Right.
right? And so I mean, this is somebody who really gets into like rebirth and reconstruction of the self and of the society, like in particularly violent and palingenetic ways. So I can see where he might identify with this.
People close to him said even to the end of his life while he's training fascist militias, though every week when Shonen Weekly came out, he would be first in line to get a copy of whatever the new Shonen mangas were. He was super into it.
Brilliant. Oh my God, brilliant. Imagine fucking like waiting in line for like Harry Potter or whatever, and the guy in front of you is like, "Yeah, I'm training like the biggest white nationalist militia in the state. It's a pretty big deal."
Well, people knew who he was too, is the interesting thing, because he was a celebrity. He in this period in the early 60s marries Koji Tomada, a diplomat. Till she died, claimed he only went to gay bars for the research. She held that she attested till she died. Yes, my husband went to gay bars all the time. He was researching for his novels. Uh, Not a lot of gay bars in his novels. So
You know what? Kill your darlings, right? Who knows what kind of drafts he's got stocked up.
what he did write a draft of is Sea of Fertility, which is considered his magnum opus. Starts in 1648 and is published up till his death, parts of it, which is about a law student's life featuring many things about Japan. Sea of Fertility is a really, really dense subject. And if I start talking about it, we'll be on it for a while. But it is like considered his great work. But in this time, he also starts pushing really far right, fighting against the intellectual left and calling for a return to tradition. He wrote a novel called After the Banquet, so specifically about a mayoral race in Tokyo that he was sued for invasion of privacy by multiple people involved in the race. He gets into acting and modeling around this time. He's in multiple magazines. He acts in the film Afraid to Die, and he also sings the opening song in that movie. And then he made and starred in a film that was quite popular called, and this is what it's called, Patriotism or The Right of Love and Death.
Where are these people these days, right? I mean, I'm thinking of John Wilkes Booth right now, right? One of the biggest names on the stage in America at the time that he shot Lincoln. And to have that career and to just throw it all at, what Mishima ends up throwing it at
Yeah.
is it's something you don't often see these days.
The equivalent now is, I guess, Hulk Hogan ripping off his shirt at the Republican National Convention. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not nearly as sauced up.
No, not at all. He was considered repeatedly for a Nobel Prize, but didn't get one. There was a Japanese winner in, I think, 66, and Mishima said when he saw a Japanese man win, he was like, I'll never win a Nobel Prize because there's no chance they're coming back here for another,
Well,
like,
yeah, because they're too busy giving it to fucking Harry Martinson, who's on the committee.
true. That's exactly right. But he did win Mr. Dandy in Japan in 1967,
Of
which
course
is
he fucking did.
like a sexiest man alive, but like
Let's
for
go. Mr.
artists.
Dandy.
And then he was in an international competition of public figures for Mr. International and got second place in 1967, losing to Charles de Gaulle, barely, which is
What?
such a baffling. I don't know what was going
Wait,
on.
what was the criteria? Like,
You were supposed to be an intellectual, but also like a charming man or whatever. And I do not see that with Charles de Gaulle, I gotta say.
just like name dudes from around the world I guess. Like,
I think so. Uh,
it's also intriguing to me that like somebody with this fascination for European art would go on to be a Japanese ultranationalist, though I
yes.
guess like there's not really a contradiction there, I suppose, if you consider that he conceives of like Greek sculpture, like Italian sculpture as some undiluted expression of their origins.
Well, the thing is, He does decide a little bit to start talking about Europe because first then he then writes Voices of the Heroic Dead, which calls Hirohito a traitor and says we got to return to pre-World War II, pre-Hirohito. But then he writes in 1968 a play called, are you ready for this?
Hmm.
My Friend Hitler. Uh,
Really hitting the ground running.
yeah. It's a play where Hitler, Ernst Röhm, and others talk about fascism, fashion, and aesthetics. He's quoted. Someone asked in an interview about this. They said, "So, do you like Hitler?" And he responded, and of course, this is a translation. To be honest, I feel a terrifying interest in Hitler. But if the question is whether I like or dislike him, I can only answer, I suppose I don't like him. Hitler was a political genius, but he was not a hero. He thoroughly lacked the refreshing, sunny quality indispensable to becoming a hero. Hitler is as gloomy as the 20th century.
He's yeah, what else do you say about Hitler? He's gloomy.
Yeah, what a weird, like, if he was sunnier, had a sunnier disposition. The fuck?
God.
In 1968,
I
amid
want who played Hitler in his fucking like in his fucking like My Friend Hitler play. I want to know that. Which Japanese actor was like at the casting call and answered like, "Oh, you can you be like the most insane evil man to ever live?"
well, you'll appreciate this. After this, I forgot to write this down, but I did read this. After this, the unions refused to let union actors work with Mishima. Um,
Imagine, just imagine.
because they were like, yeah, union actors, because like communists were very influential in the actors union, and they were like, we're not work. But he managed to find like students and shit. Because around the late '60s, he starts hanging out with like right-wing student groups a lot.
There's always fucking like, everywhere from the contrarian, free speech absolutists to the like fucking edgelords to the like young, whatever the Japanese version of young Republicans is. There's always fucking students.
Well, Lenore, you'll like this. What the group he falls in with starts calling themselves whatever it is in Japanese, but translates to the new right. So, like, yeah, basically just what we would call, yeah, that. It's TPUSA.
Turning
But
point
there's
in Japan.
in '68, there were left-wing student uprisings all over the world. Japan is no exception. And he and a number of right-wingers take a blood pact not to let Japan go socialist. He then does a failed attempt to make it a nationwide thing to join a right-wing militia. He tries to work with the Japanese military, and he says, "I'll recruit for you like 10,000 National Guardsmen." Because he thinks a celebrity will work, but like people don't really want to actually do that just because they like his books. He ends up forming a small militia of what he claimed was 100 people. Most biographers say it was closer to 50, called the Shield Society. They trained together, and instead of training with guns, they trained with katanas.
Okay, this is why it was so familiar to me. We'll do World War Z on the pod at some
Yeah.
point. But one of the people that Max Brooks's interviewer character talks to in World War Z is this guy who's joined a new like civic duty like society in the like rebuilt like post-zombie apocalypse Japan. It's called the Shield Society, and this
Yeah.
passes completely without comment on the part of the author. So that just jumped out at me.
I guess that's a reference to that. But in this case,
What a
does the
reference,
Shield
Jesus.
does the Shield Society in that book only use katanas?
They have this fascination with Japanese traditions. Certainly, there is a katana actually that figures heavily into the backstory of the person that he talks to. Specifically, one that he gets from this shrine in the apartment of a World War II vet.
Okay.
So,
Well,
like, you know
interesting.
which side this guy's bread's buttered on if you read between the
Sure.
lines, and you don't have to read, very far.
It is fascinating, though, that Mishima was like, we're going to overthrow the government and we're going to do that with katanas, with 50, like 19-year-olds with katanas.
A government that, like, famously, like, confiscated everybody's swords at least once throughout history.
In 1970, Mishima and some of his supporters, but not many of them because he didn't tell most of them, tried to start a coup at Camp Ishigaya, which was, near Tokyo. He tied up a commanding officer, stood out on a balcony, and we have video of this, pictures of this, and spoke to a crowd of soldiers below, reading a manifesto to them, telling them to rise up for the emperor and create a new Japan. The soldiers booed him, threw things at him, laughed at him. And a lot of his speech couldn't be heard because a helicopter went by and no one heard like a quarter of what he had to say. He went back in, untied the commander, apologized to him, and immediately committed suicide. So yeah, he immediately commits seppuku, and it actually he stabbed himself in the stomach, but his second, who's supposed to cut off his head, failed, and it took 4 hacks to get his head off with a katana. In
Wow.
fact, the guy who chose to do it did it 3 times. It didn't work, and another guy with him took the katana and had to do it himself, which is a real grisly end there.
And his last
Um,
words were thanks, jackass.
Right. One of his last interviews, though, he says Japan has lost its spiritual tradition and instead has become infested with materialism. Japan is under the curse of a green snake now. The green snake is biting Japan's chest. There is no way to escape this curse. So a lot of people think like he knew damn well this wasn't going to work. He wanted to kill himself. His whole life he had been obsessed with suicide, including like when he was 24 writing this book.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but to this day, the new right sees him as a hero. He is loved by a lot of people as a writer. Obviously, he had this massive cultural impact, but also like the far right in Japan still like is like, yeah, no, this is our guy. I guess conveniently ignoring that he is like a flaming homosexual and also was really, really, really bad at actually doing the fascism thing. So that's Mishima. Just baffling. All the more baffling for how much I enjoy most of this book.
Yeah, like it's I mean, first of all, like who makes the decision to become a fascist like purely on the if you make the decision to go with one or another political tendency purely based on like the heroes, right? The people who came before and like made names for themselves. Who decides to become a fucking fascist when this is what you have to look up to? A guy who gives a half-heard speech before soldiers and gets booed and then kills himself.
Yeah. Mishima rolled worst blunt of all time, asked to leave Japan.
Like, hey, oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I thought the let's do a coup email sent. I guess it's only just like three guys.
Also, he had to convince the other guys ahead of time not to kill themselves too. They wanted to as well. And he was like, no, no, I've set aside money for your legal defense funds. He did also set aside, worth noting, he had like 2 kids, I think. Wasn't very close with them apparently, but he did, before he died, arrange for them to be sent Christmas presents every Christmas until they were 18 and had subscription to child literary magazines for encouraging young adult literacy. So,
Okay.
interesting. I read a defense of his coup that used that as an argument that he was a good man. And I'm like, all right. You know what he could have done is like given him that himself. If he wasn't.
All this to the highest heights of philanthropy, like nobody seems to question, okay, well, why does this guy have the resources in the first place?
Yeah, and it's like I guess that I would find that to be a much sweeter story if he died in some noble pursuit or whatever. But like his best case scenario was starting like an uprising to do what I'm not even quite sure. Like he wanted to return to traditional values, but what? Restart World War II with like basically no standing military, like no like Air Force or Navy. Like what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, it does seem like I mean, and you want to talk about like literacy initiatives. Like this is the only fascist literary initiative I've ever heard of, like setting aside money to make sure his kids know how to fucking read. I mean, like, when these people get a hold of the state, right? I mean, when on the eve of the Carnation Revolution, when Portugal overthrew its fascist government, 1 in 4 Portuguese people couldn't read.
Yeah.
Like, they don't go on to make functional societies.
No, not at all. I mean, and also his plan was basically to go to war with the entire world. Like he hated the United States and China and the Soviet Union and Korea. Like,
It does seem like the geopolitics version of suicide by cop, right?
yes, yes. And he was happy to take all of Japan with him. He has whole essays where he talks about how he wishes all of Japan could have been as the kamikaze pilots and stuff like that, and how the kamikaze are the only ones who understood the assignment of the 20th century and other such.
I mean, listen, everybody
Bullshit.
on Blue Sky calling for the balkanization of the United States, I hear you, I feel you, but step up.
Yeah, no, we're not quite at this level. Uh, I will say, you're not going to hear me give Orwell's 1984 a lot of props, but in 1984, there is a right-wing society in Japan that they call their government death worship, and does seem like Mishima's just Mishima's government like exists in 1984. So, maybe 1984 is set in a world where Mishima's coup worked.
Let's look up 1984 fan fiction once we're done here.
I kind of want to. I wonder.
Or maybe we ought to write some of our own. Perhaps
Maybe we'll
put
just
it up
do
on
a
a
19
platform somewhere.
Maybe
I don't know,
we'll,
probably never
after
happen.
2 years of saying like every 3 episodes, yeah, we'll get around to that book eventually. We get around to that book eventually. But today is not that day. Today we're talking about Confessions of a Mask, though it feels like we've already talked about like the first third of it.
Yeah, essentially, it's a little bit like the Japanese hillbilly elegy in that like it's structured like, it's his life story. We covered a lot of it already. It starts off on the subject of European art. It starts off with a quote from Dostoevsky. Uh, Beauty is a terrible and awful thing. It is terrible because it never has and never can be fathomed, for God sets us nothing but riddles. Within beauty both shores meet, and all contradictions exist side by side. I'm not a cultivated man, brother, but I've thought a lot about this. Truly, there are mysteries without end. Too many riddles weigh man down on earth. We guess them as we can and come out of the water dry. Beauty. I cannot bear the thought that a man of noble heart and lofty mind sets out with the ideal of the Madonna and ends with the ideal of Sodom. What's still more awful is that the man with the ideal of Sodom in his soul does not renounce the ideal of the Madonna, and in the bottom of his heart he may still be on fire, sincerely on fire, with longing for the beautiful ideal, just as in the days of his youthful innocence. Yes, man's heart is wide, too wide indeed. I'd have it narrower. The devil only knows what to make of it. But what the intellect regards as shameful often appears splendidly beautiful to the heart. Is there beauty in Sodom? Believe me, most men find their beauty in Sodom. Did you know this secret? The dreadful thing is that beauty is not only terrifying, but also mysterious. God and the devil are fighting there, and their battlefield is the heart of man. But a man's heart wants to speak only of its own ache. Listen now. I'll tell you what it says. And does he succeed in telling us what a man's heart says, do we think?
I wouldn't say his heart is too wide in this book. I'll say that. He
he
would
he
have it
makes
narrower.
yeah, he makes a very conscious effort to narrow it. No, absolutely. Like it really encapsulates so much of what I find weird about this guy and so much of what he puts into this narrative, Like, God sets us nothing but riddles, right? He's not an absurdist. He's tormented constantly by shit beyond his comprehension. He talks a great deal about contradictions existing side by side, and he's drowning in not really the attempt to reconcile them, but the idea that they never will be, and just like batted about, by fate. And he's got a real hard on for beauty, right?
Mhm.
And a doomed pursuit of beauty, where it frequently terminates in ugliness.
And like the way this book starts too, it has that paragraph or that paragraph there, and then it says chapter one, and it's notable. There's only 4 chapters in this book. It says chapter one, and I love this because it's just like it starts here, and the gas never gets left up from here. For many years, I claimed I could remember things seen at the time of my own birth. Like that's the first sentence. Um, and yeah, he would go on and a little later say, no matter how they explain, no matter how they laugh me away, I could not but believe I remembered my own birth. He has a very specific memory of being born and like emerging. And he says he saw light falling on him and during his first bath. And they were like, well, you were born in the darkness. You were born at night. And he's like, I don't know. I just, so like at the very beginning, he's like, I have this sort of supernatural knowledge of myself that is obviously not correct, right? Because literally he is remembering wrong. This is not a real memory. And also there is some kind of connection here, right, to his weird relationship to women being born, to, just that literal side of things. Something that he is, I think half of this is like him throwing out reasons that he might be gay, is like half of this book. And like this is maybe reason number one. He doesn't say it explicitly, but like maybe it's this. I don't know. I got a lot going on, man.
Well, and also, like again, I mean, first of all, you're right. There is a lot of the manifesto about this. Like, if he were alive today, he'd be on 4chan, like typing this shit out. Like, he'd be some dude being like, "I think I can sleep with my eyes open," and this is what it says about this, that, and the other
Yeah, to
about
be
the
clear,
world.
y'all, this is the first Groyper, like the way he writes. This is just straight up.
So many things that he hits, like
This
way
is a
ahead of their
Nick
time.
Fuentes fan, like a spin-off podcast of like Nick Fuentes stream or something.
100%. But like that's the thing as well. Like the idea that he has that he can remember his own birth, and yet, like, the strongest disproof of this memory was the fact that I had been born not in the daytime, but at 9 in the evening. There could have been no streaming sunlight. But like even so, like he goes on to say, well, like, I have this information disproving it, and yet this is an idea that I can still hold in my head. He can still hold these two contradictory things in his head. And that's a theme that follows him throughout his life because he never really reconciles.
He is, like Mishima, this character, born in 1925, 2 years after the Great Earthquake, and he is, yeah, into this family that is quite well off, but they are downwardly mobile, which is, a recurring theme among reactionaries, right? It's like I'm doing better than everybody around me, but I'm doing worse than my dad was.
Yeah, let's describe this house here. Like, so he says not too good a section of Tokyo in an old rented house, but he describes the house as pretentious, right? It's 2 stories on the upper slope and 3 on the lower, so it's on a slope. There's a basement, numerous gloomy rooms, 6 housemaids, as we mentioned. Like, there's a gate, a garden. Like, he's as you said, best house in maybe not so great a neighborhood.
And very sickly child, he has a time when he's a kid on his fourth birthday where he vomits something the color of coffee, and then he says, I was given injections of camphor and glucose until I was like a pincushion. And for 2 hours they thought he was dead until he just suddenly started like urinating on himself and light returned to his cheeks, and he blames it on auto intoxication, which is not a real disease. He's basically blaming it on like his humors are out of whack. But he has something going on here, which the real life parallel to this is, this is a child that was told he was very sickly and could not go out in the sun or anything. We don't really know what he had as a child. It is very likely that his grandmother was just so controlling that that was kind of her reasoning, because this is a guy who would go on to be a very healthy, very strong man once he started working. So I'm kind of inclined to believe when I read biographies and stuff that the sickness is sort of just, I mean, any sickliness that he has is from, never having touched the sunlight till he was like 20
Mm.
years old.
And being very controlled in terms of his expression, in terms of his appearance. Like his hair starts out blondish, he says, but they dye it black with olive oil until it just stops being blonde. Like he's very used to being repressed from a very early age,
Mhm.
which is why perhaps he doesn't quite know how to unpack his feelings when he sees a really hot laborer at a very young age, night soil man, and he's like, "This guy's the hottest thing I've ever seen."
Yeah, it says he remembers it with disproportionate clarity. And here's the quote, right? It says, the very image is the earliest of those that have kept tormenting and frightening me all my life. It was a young man who was coming down towards us with handsome, ruddy cheeks and shining eyes, wearing a dirty roll of cloth around his head for a sweatband. He came down the slope carrying a yoke of night soil buckets over one shoulder, balancing their heaviness expertly with his footsteps. He was a night soil man, a ladler of excrement. He was dressed as a laborer, wearing split-toed shoes with rubber soles and black canvas tops, and dark blue cotton trousers of the close-fitting kind called thigh pullers. And it goes on for a while, but then it says, I had a presentiment that there in this world a kind of desire like stinging pain. Looking up at that dirty youth, I was choked by desire, thinking, I want to change into him, thinking, I want to be him. I can remember clearly that my desire had two focal points. The first was his dark blue thigh pullers, the other his occupation. The close fitting jeans plainly outlined the lower half of his body, which moved lithely and seemed to be walking directly toward me. An inexpressible adoration for those trousers was born in me, and I did not understand why. So you have here, obviously, baby's first gay crush, but it's also on a guy whose job is to carry fertilizer, like to carry shit around. You immediately have this. I'm looking at this attractive, strong guy who has a gross job, and there is this immediate connection in his head between sort of things that are unseemly, that are gross, and things that are attractive, which of course he feels his attraction to men in the first place to be unseemly and gross, so he doesn't see that as a contradiction at all.
Right, right, and again, really well realized in this prose. Like coming to this attraction to men and expressing it, even though he himself at that time is not quite sure what to make of it, right? It is significant that this was first manifested to me in the form of a night soil man. Excrement is a symbol for the earth, and it was doubtlessly the malevolent love of the earth mother that was calling to me. Weird phrasing, but you can sort of dig down and unpack a little bit of what he means by it, right? Because it's a symbol that comes to you half formed that you kind of have to lay a reading on, as he himself would have had to, parsing through his memories. Again, like there's that, there's a presentiment that there is in this world a kind of desire like stinging pain. He has a way of really working through his emotions in the prose that is very compelling to follow.
I mean, and
And
he's earliest identified case of known phenomenon. Do I want him or do I want to be him? Well known to me for sure, like as like a closeted guy who was like, no, I don't, not
no,
with
literally,
this
like
guy.
as somebody who went through life having one or another thought about wanting to be a certain way, but not really knowing if that was for me, like there's so much real stuff in here he says about his experience, right? The feeling of being attracted to somebody versus wanting to be them is something that's only been articulated to me like very, very recently. And it's something that I wish I'd known I could verbalize much earlier in my life. Like there is stuff in here that is genuine and that is relatable, which makes it all the more frustrating that it's bound up in what he became.
Yes, absolutely. And he's he goes on to not, he's not dealing with it well. He becomes obsessed with picture books, He gets obsessed with one specific picture book of a beautiful knight riding a horse, nostrils flaring, and then the maid says, "This looks like a man, but it's a woman. Honestly, her name was Joan of Arc. The story is that she went to war wearing a man's clothes and served her country." A woman? I felt as though I had been knocked flat. The person I thought he was a she. If this beautiful knight was a woman and not a man, what was there left? Which is there's like an intensity here, like it's obviously like kind of laughable. It's like a woman, like you're freaking out or whatever, but it's also like he's like it's interesting because he wants to be quote unquote normal. He wants to be attracted to women, but then he feels horrified when he realizes he has been attracted to someone who is a woman. Notwithstanding the very reasonable argument that Joan of Arc was probably a trans man. But
Yeah, Andy Boyd could tell you much more about that.
yeah,
Go listen to our Occupy Prescott episode. She's great.
yeah, that perfectly reasonable argument. But like for the sake of in this book, Mishima is having this, or his standing character is having this experience,
But
and it's
how
very weird.
Yeah, because how adversarial is this, right? He encounters this person who is not who he is led to believe they are, and he's shocked, right? He's cheated.
He said this was the first revenge by reality that I had met in my life, and it seemed a cruel one, particularly upon the sweet fantasies I had cherished concerning his death, thinking of
Revenge
the
by
knights.
reality. Yeah, see, he's writing all these adversarial narratives into every interaction here. And like we can't forget that like this is a I don't know how far into the sauce he was at this time, but this is an incipient fascist writing this.
Yes. And it is interesting because he says years later I was to discover a glorification of the death of a beautiful knight in a verse of Oscar Wilde. Fair is the knight who lieth slain amid the rush and reed.
Mhm.
Which first of all, Oscar Wilde mentioned. That seems to be a trend recently. But secondly, yeah, this is like part of his obsession with death, right? And obviously as like a fascist and as someone who becomes obsessed with death on a personal level, he has that. But he has this genuine attraction to death. When he reads stories of knights and heroes, he's like, they're hot, but it would be a whole lot hotter if they got fucking stabbed, you know?
Death,
In,
yeah.
in navigating that is interesting because, like, obviously, I'm not here to be like a kink scold or anything, but like, that's not really. But what's disturbing about it isn't, so much like, oh my God, how could someone be into whatever? I don't care. But it's this idea of like, he is obsessed with that which he is not supposed to have. And I think to me, my reading of this is consistently he is kind of overcompensating, right? Like he is told that his entire sexual his entire sexual understanding of the world is wrong. So he's like, okay, well, the reason I'm like this is because I like things I shouldn't like. And so he's leaning into just everything that should be bad is good to him. Whereas, like, if he had sort of a balanced upbringing, they could just be like, oh yeah, no, you're attracted to that guy because he's a hot guy. But like because he's stewing in his own brain, this is where he comes to.
Yeah, and there's of course there's room for that absolutely in fiction. I love any kind of like macabre and like fucked up stuff to read about. I'll read about, your incest or cannibalism, I love a good gore flick, right? Exploring experiences and identities that are already considered taboo or grotesque to quote unquote polite society. Exploring those unmoored by society's other taboos and like notions of good taste, sure, fine, do that, absolutely. But it's what he synthesizes that into and the worldview that leaves him with that is really at issue here. Um,
And he's also, it's just an obsession with masculinity too. Like he passes by soldiers and he says, the soldier's odor of sweat, that odor like a sea breeze, like the air burned gold above the seashore, struck my nostrils and intoxicated me. This was probably my earliest memories of odors. Which again, intense, kind of wild,
he's a
take
scent guy.
a seat, it's okay. But also at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's this like interest in like manliness, is this interest in hyper masculinity, which is, of course, a thing that he is not, that he has been kept from him, that the actual Mishima would in his life pursue relentlessly, not before, but after he got famous and had some money.
Which actually, I mean, that dovetails really, really nicely into his fascination for all things tragic, as he says, right? It's got as much to do with his sexuality as with that, right? People and experiences that are forever foreign to him, right? If somebody takes his ticket on a streetcar, right, he doesn't know this person's life. There's an element of tragedy in that, he says, right? Which stems from, a very deterministic outlook, right? Everything's predetermined. There are aspects of the world that you are doomed not to see because of your prescribed role on the human stage.
No, he literally says he is believes in the Augustinian theory of predestination, which, again, this is such like a it's funny, like, cause it's like it's a tragic narrative that like obviously this guy is a victim, but then it's like he's doing like online right-wing things in 1949.
Yeah, he's 24 when he writes this, as much as you can have anything like all figured out at 24, right?
Yeah, but he's like the way he's talking is like, yeah, I quite consider myself interested in the Augustinian theory of predetermination.
Hmm.
Like he's talking like a trad statue guy on Twitter.
He
He'll go
literally is a trad statue guy.
right. He literally, I will get into it in a second, but he gets into that. He's talking about like he's mad that his like femboy is actually a woman. Like he is like the way he talks is like in this very particular type of like neurotic, feels like an online right winger who is dealing with their very specific set of neuroses. And obviously you have yeah, and like right down to like the bodybuilding, the obsession with the self, it makes me think of the I guess I'll say alleged concept that Steven Crowder got surgery to make his chest look bigger. I guess I have to say alleged, but he did. And like things like that. There's like or like Elon Musk doing everything he can to masculinize, right? Or like these guys getting into like fighting and lifting and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with like embracing your identity, being strong, whatever. But it's like this right-wing impulse to, because you are not this, platonic ideal, to chase it. And specifically, the only ones to really be able to chase it be those with money, because the character in this story can't. And Mishima couldn't when he wrote this. And Mishima only did when he began money and like time to like train and later in his life like hire people to like cook and all this stuff for him. And I find that to be like really fascinating as well. Like it's kind of the dichotomy of like this is an unachievable goal,
Right.
unless you're in a certain class strata. And it's like, and then maybe you should think, okay, well, maybe this isn't possible on some kind of universal scale.
Yeah, and I mean, while we're on the subject of tragedy, right? It's really sad to see what he does consider attainable as a child, even if in a fleeting sense, right? He recounts he goes to see Shokokusai Tenkatsu, who I guess is a magician, and he sees her perform, and he's like, wow, the way she's made up, the way that she's dressed, like, I'm fascinated, right? He says specifically, in wishing to become her, I did not have to taste that bitter mixture of longing and shame, right? And he dresses up in his mother's clothing at the end of the night, and he's like, I'm Tenkatsu, like, and he has fun just in this moment of play, which, as we'll see, doesn't really blossom into anything because he ends up reproducing the very repression that he grew up with on his own character.
Exactly. And if we are tracing this to the modern right, this is, for those of you watching at home, this is Steven Crowder doing his bit where he goes out in public dressed as a woman.
Well, and like
No,
he,
I'm kidding.
he he compares his fascination with women's clothing directly to Elagabalus, right? Debate around the identity of Elagabalus because a lot of those assessments are tied up in accounts that sought to defame him by an effeminate portrayal.
Yeah,
But like, there's arguments that you could make that this was an early like trans woman, right? Who
sure.
knows? Crusader Kings 3 depicts Elagabalus as female, interestingly.
I think that settles the argument as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you,
Uh,
Paradox.
R.I.P. Mishima, you would have loved Crusader Kings 3. Maybe
Unironically, no, he would have been more of a Hearts of Iron fan.
he could have just played that and then maybe not paid attention to anything outside of his little spreadsheet game.
He
He's very
just Yukio Mishima like creates a let's play of Hearts of Iron that's like the My Little Pony version of Japan conquering the world.
There's a weird scene where a parade goes by his house and a bunch of youths run into his garden and destroy a bunch of shit. Not sure what to make of that. It's just another violent scene. I don't know. You have anything on that? Because I was gonna ask about that because I took no notes, but I'm like, that's really weird that that happens.
Well, he's really like disenchanted with it before even there's is this like I guess a Shinto kind of festival like
Mhm.
there's pallbearers taking this like shrine to some place or other that's prescribed. On this particular day, I was standing in front of the gate with other members of the household. Both leaves of the vine patterned iron gate had been thrown open, and water had been sprinkled neatly on the paving stones outside the gate. The hesitant sound of drums was drawing near, the plaintive melody of a chant in which individual words only gradually became distinguishable, pierced through the confused tumult of the festival, proclaiming what might be called the true theme of this outwardly purposeless uproar, a seeming lamentation for the extremely vulgar mating of humanity and eternity, which could be consummated only through some such pious immorality as this. He's not impressed here with what he
Yeah,
sees. And, like, it's in one sense, sure, maybe it's an edgy kid, but in the other sense, like it's interesting to me that it seems to me that this obsession with tragedy of his prevents him from enjoying the summer festival because it's like a fleeting moment.
sure. And I like to imagine that when his dad takes him back from the grandmother, it's like he hears this kid be like, "What pious immorality is this?" And it's like, "Oh my God, I got to get this kid out of the
He
house."
wasn't stuffed in enough lockers, clearly.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to hold him up to a train. Fuck. Doesn't happen in the book, but
Ever since then, he says violent anticipation has always been anguish rather than joy for me. And I don't know if I buy that because like he seems
clearly
really at
not.
peace. Yeah, he seems really at peace with the idea of, he's the sort of suicidal that like you wouldn't go hang yourself, but like, maybe you wouldn't look both ways crossing the street, right? And he's
He
really
wants to get bombed. Like he's like, oh,
literally.
American planes. He's like, as long as I don't get bombed around my family, because I don't really want to be around them when I die.
Well, because that's the thing, like he doesn't have a lot of kind words for the ultranationalism of the government. He doesn't have a lot of kind words for the pressing of civilians into the war effort, up to and including possibly an American landing ultimately, which never happens. But like nonetheless, he is disappointed when the war ends.
Yeah, because he likes the violence. Like he likes that there is war. Maybe not the work part of it, but we'll get to the war. Before we get to the war, he's jorking it for a while there. That's a clear. He finds a toy, and
A
he
curious toy.
a curious toy. He's talking about his dick, folks. Mishima spends a long time talking about his dick.
Let's
Um,
let's 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 get into it here. Like, here we go. This toy increased in volume at every opportunity and hinted that, rightly used, it would be quite a delightful thing. But directions for its use were nowhere written, and so when the toy took the initiative in wanting to play with me, my bewilderment was inevitable. Occasionally, my humiliation and impatience became so aggravated that I even thought I wanted to destroy the toy. In the end, however, there was nothing for it but to surrender on my side to the insubordinate toy with its expression of sweet secrecy and wait passively to see what would happen.
He's the worst. Oh my God. I hate those sentences that drive me crazy. What the fuck are you talking
The
about? I know.
toy likewise raised its head toward death and pools of blood and muscular flesh.
I hate when my toy raises its head towards pools of muscular flesh. I mean, it's
But that's
very
what was going on
effective.
when we watched Tokyo Gore Police.
Something along those lines. It's very effective writing, but like it's also just so unsettling. Like it is very uncomfortable to read, which is of course it's supposed to be, but I'm just like, like why don't say it like that? But like also at the same time, does you know, the it came with no instructions is a real experience that a lot of people have. And then if it does come with instructions, it's every young man's battle. So you probably don't want
Mhm.
that either.
I'm sure I've mentioned it on the show before. Like the first like explicit like literature I think I ever stumbled across was Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction when I was like 11.
How did this not come up on the Sonic episode?
I think I mentioned it.
I don't think so.
I don't know. I don't remember half of what I said.
I was listening back to an episode and I was like, who is this Jacob guy? He's got a lot of cool things to say because I don't remember anything I say either. Um, you know, but like this description is fascinating, but it also leads me to ask if he had an instruction manual, right? If Mishima had read Every Young Man's Battle, how would things turn out differently?
Well, I couldn't help but think of Every Young Man's Battle, especially toward the end when he
They
talks
should
about
use
the
Mishima as a example of like, and if you don't follow this, if you jack off, here's what's gonna happen. You're
well, he
gonna do
talks
it too.
about how like full summer lashed the galloping horses of my sexual desire. And then he says that yeah, sometimes I jerk off 5 times a day. It's bad.
He said he's the guy who asked how many times a day is habitual. It was Mishima. He was at Fred Stoker's own conference.
Yeah, once you get to splitting hairs that way, like you're already like you got to set aside $900 for Mr. Stoker.
He's gonna help you out. Don't worry, Mr. Bram Stoker. That is because he's gonna make you worse.
What
Uh,
did he would have loved Dracula.
oh God, he probably read. It's very possible he read Dracula. He read by the end of his life. He read multiple languages.
Hmm.
So it's very possible he read it. I think he would have lost. Yeah, he would have lost his mind for this shit. But what he didn't have Dracula, but he did have storybooks, fantasy, dragons eating knights, and his own brain, and also pictures of Greek statues of saints getting shot with arrows. And he was like, "Oh yeah, that's the good shit. I love
Saint
that."
Sebastian, he says, is the first time he jerks off was to a picture of Saint Sebastian shot full of arrows.
Yes. And he refers to it for the rest of it as his bad habit that is jacking off. And he talks about the story of Saint Sebastian, who is a Praetorian guard who refuses to continue to carry out the emperor's wishes and is killed for it. And there is like an interesting like a guy defying an emperor, a military man defying an emperor
Hmm.
story and dying for it versus him who I guess if I want to dig deep here, is chooses not to be a Saint Sebastian, right? Chooses to just be a cog in the machine of society, and he does not achieve any kind of glorious or meaningful death like Saint Sebastian achieves. I think he, wants to die, maybe in service of the Emperor, but like still, it is interesting that he doesn't have his Saint Sebastian moment because he's also not particularly courageous. Now, or really until the end of his life where he has his moment, but it is in such a stilted and strange way.
Yeah, yeah, no, like he's got this fascination indeed with, soldiers. We talk about like an early sexual awakening of his being smelling their sweat, right? And not just the scent of it, but the conditions and the experiences that led to them sweating, right? The places that they went and saw, like, and it's the sort of thing that attracts him to, laborers, soldiers, kids who exercise a lot, as it happens, his classmates. There's one in particular, Omi. Do we want to talk about Omi?
Omi, who thrust his snow-drenched leather gloves against his cheeks. Omi is a young sort of bully at school who is not a very good kid and uh, you know, a few grades older than him, and he is just obsessed with this guy. Omi, who's like jumping up on the swing set and is like, "Who can fight me?" And of course, our character jumps up and immediately just gets his shit rocked by Omi, and he's like, "From that time on, I was in love with Omi."
I
Uh,
love I love the way that he describes what attracts him to Omi. The savage melancholy inherent in flesh, not tainted in any way with intellect.
yes.
Like, do you remember that tweet a while back that was like, some of you here have what I like to call a noble savage view of normies?
Yeah.
That's what this is, right? There's so much of Mishima's attraction or revulsion is based on his completely unchallenged and untested impression of the people around him. You know,
Mhm.
in particular, like, oh, this guy's big, he must be dumb, right? He must be a himbo.
Yeah, which can also be shattered for any reason at any time.
Well, because he like
Peaceful or
it's this
otherwise.
bizarre like self-effacing desire that he has for Omi, like that leads him to like he wants to avoid violating this impression that he has of Omi with any resemblance to himself.
But it's also interesting because you would expect him to be this like high-minded intellectual, but he's like has to cheat at school to like get decent grades. You know, it's not like he's a genius, you
Well,
know.
he's too cool for school.
He's far too cool for school or for sports, or for sunlight. He he
I
is
mean, you'd be pretty
he's a
cool if
goon.
you were out of the sunlight, you know,
That's true.
temperature
He
wise.
he said he studies the katana and he studies gooning, and that's about it. And again, this is the father of the modern right, I
Here it
think.
is. This whole paragraph is hilarious to me. Um, and yet from the outset, a logical impossibility was involved for me in these rude tastes, making my desires forever unattainable. There's that, unattainable like tragedy thing again. As a rule, there is nothing more logical than the carnal impulse. Again, doesn't really impact that, but okay. But in my case, no sooner would I begin to share intellectual understanding with the person who had attracted me, than my desire for that person would collapse. The discovery of even the slightest intellectualism in a companion would force me to a rational judgment of values. In a reciprocal relationship such as love, one must give the same thing he demands from the other. Hence, my desire for ignorance in a companion required, however temporarily, an unconditional revolt against reason on my part. But for me, such a revolt was absolutely impossible. I want to love this guy, but I can't be as dumb as he is.
The way his brain works is just fascinating. Like, I would say he should go to therapy, but I don't know what they're gonna do for him. Like,
He starts from these weird essentialisms, right?
right,
And
he's making
just
these assumptions that are just coming out of just just shit he's read, right? Like not even stuff from school because he's not even paying attention to that, but just like books in his grandma's house. He's like put together an ideology, like constructed out of, uh chewing gum and wire and like it's just basing everything on it. And it's fascinating and it's also like he's so confident and he talks in such a way that sounds smart if you don't listen to the words, right? Like, we all know that, erotic carnal desires is the highest of logics. And it's like, well, that sounds great when you just say it, but that's not true. What the fuck are you
and
talking
and
about?
and that's the thing, right? He thinks he's much smarter than he is at this moment.
Mhm.
Yes, he also thinks he's much weirder than he is, I think. Right? It's if you tell me, yeah, I like my big hulking galoots, like I would think nothing of it.
Yeah.
Right? It's when he tries to intellectualize it that it gets strange.
He can post, these today, he's posting like, oh, I think this is hot. Then people be like, okay. But then he's like getting fucking cybersmith about it. Like, like we might have to cut this, but did you see cybersmiths talk about trans women in pools?
No, do go on. I'm curious. Oh wait, no, no, no. I did see this. I did see this.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like that. It reads like that fucking cybersmith posts about that. He was like, he's like, I presume conservative trans women, of course, are wearing chastity cages in pools. They're like, why? He's like, because I find it sexy. It's like, yeah,
and
that's not intellectual. You're
and
just
and yeah, and the pills that make a green person like wrote a comic about this. He's like, it's like and the pills that make a green person wrote a comic about this. Like, it's like, you realize this isn't a compromise, right? This is just you getting your own weird thing that other people conform to.
yeah, you just made something up, and then yeah, but like that's what he's doing here in maybe a little higher minded way than Cybersmith, but like he's describing the shit he thinks is hot, and then he's like trying to come up with a whole thing for it. The same way that he like sees a guy carrying fertilizer that's hot, and he was like, surely the impetus of Mother Earth's whatever. It's like, no, you think this guy in tight pants is hot, like, and and it's not entirely his fault that he feels this way because again, he's in a society that ostracizes people with his sexuality. But it is like interesting because this comes becomes a through line through this type of conservatism of like you have these just like libidinal impulses that you feel like you have the right to either pursue or run away from in really strange and shocking and contradictory ways. And then you come up with an intellectual framework for it and you say it really fast. And then you expect enough people to think you're smart to like just ram it through. And
First of all,
sometimes
I
it
think we
works.
can all agree that the carnal impulse is the most logical in any human psyche.
For the sake of argument, let's say I'm attracted to Omi. Okay. Well, let me say I'm jealous of his body here. I will.
No second year actually plays on the playground in and of itself, right? In and of the enjoyment of being on the seesaw. They have to do it in a sort of half joking, ironic sense. Otherwise, they risk being thought of as uncool.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Mishima and Ben Shapiro should hang out. I think that.
This is the first like I think like explicitly fascist literature that we've engaged with since Ben Shapiro's book, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about I mean, like, obviously every young man's battle and hillbilly elegy has elements there, but I would say that as like this is a fascist text, probably, yeah, probably so.
Yeah, fascist enough to have a compulsion towards suicide from watching this kid he has a crush on play on the playground, right?
Yeah. And then because he's mad about his armpit hair or something, he has to go jack off about it to his own armpit into the ocean while his mom's right there.
I'm sorry. I know we're not king scolding here, but that I can't not find that funny.
Yeah, no, it's just repeated like FBI could not beat this shit out of me type
Hmm.
stuff that he's just writing down here. And again, I don't know that Mishima actually did this, but like most of this stuff we do, everything in this book we can fact check did happen to Mishima. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and again, if not literally, right, it's important to Mishima that you think of him as the sort of person who does think and feel this way, right?
Right.
And then you judge like the worldviews and the assumptions that follow on from that, right? He says at one point, the eyes through which I saw Omi were always those of a first glance, or if I may say so, of the primeval glance. It was purely an unconscious attitude on my part, a ceaseless effort to protect my 14-year-old purity from the process of erosion. And I think he's still doing that at the time of writing.
Yes, and forever does. I mean, like all his stuff is like this.
I
Um,
mean, the way that he talks about Omi, it's just again, there's aspects of the prose that I like. He communicates very well, very specific feelings with his bizarre word choices. But the way he describes Omi, right? His eyes flashed with the bold resolve of one who defies the gods, and for a moment their pupils mirrored the clouds and blue skies of May, along with the cold disdain. And right, the way he talks about his crush would be even funnier if you weren't so sincere about it.
right. No, that's the thing. It's like
If you weren't, I should say, still sincere after 10 years.
there's so much in this book when I'm reading it, I'm like, I just want to dunk on this. And then I like read something else and I'm like, damn, yeah, you're getting at something here. Like you were cooking here. Like this is a way a lot of people feel. I understand how you got here. But then you read something else that's like, he drives me insane.
He teaches himself to be strong and less shy by scowling at passersby on the train at one point.
Right. Like
He would 100% be into mewing.
he's yeah, no, he's in a
For weeks, I
Discord
couldn't talk
server.
to people because I was engaged in the exercise of holding my tongue against the roof of my mouth, the better to improve my bone structure.
That just reads like something out of this book. Like literally, like I would not have been surprised if I had read this. He's just like this is a guy who this is a guy who ends up coming to the conclusion that the only way to fix his soul is becoming good at the katana. Like in this is a type of guy that we all know quite well, I fear. And they've just kind of devolved since they got access to the internet, I think. They don't have to work as hard to get you to read their posts.
Regrettably, and it's sad in a sense, right? Because you read these people's posts, you read this guy's prose and how he views the world then and now, and you're like, you're this person's experiencing perfectly normal things for a kid to experience and grappling with them again in a very sort of constantly self-critical, self-effacing, adversarial way, right? I mean, I can't help but think of there's a bit on page 55 where it's like the universal idea of beauty in ideal of beauty in Greek sculpture likewise approaches a close resemblance between the male and female. And he goes on about like how like there's something beautiful in like the male and the female trying to become like the other in their attraction to each other. He's like, in short, since their mutual love cannot achieve a perfection in mutual identity, is there not a mental process whereby each of them tries instead to emphasize their points of dissimilarity, blah, blah, blah. Or if they do achieve it, it unfortunately lasts for only a fleeting moment of illusion, overshooting their mark and passing on beyond to some point where the mark no longer exists, right? Like there's a pessimism in that, right? Two people trying to be attracted to each other, but ultimately never sort of, I mean, not to flex my Victor Hugo on anybody, but like I couldn't help but think of this bit from Les Miserables. The first symptom of true love in a young man is timidity, in a young woman, boldness. This is surprising, and yet nothing is more natural. It is the two sexes tending to unite and each acquiring the qualities of the other. Again, like essentialist, right? There's problems that we have with it, but it's a reading of a romance that ultimately culminates in a happy ending. And he doesn't have access to that.
Right. What he does have access to is a society on the brink of apocalyptic war. He says, because World War II begins, and he's still in high school when reads, with the beginning of the war, a wave of hypocritical stoicism swept the entire country. Even the higher schools did not escape. All during middle school, we had longed for the happy day of graduation to higher school when we could let our hair grow long. But now, when the day arrived, we were no longer allowed to gratify our ambition. We still had to shave our heads. The craze for our gaudy socks was likewise a thing of the past. Instead, periods of military drill became absurdly frequent, and various other ridiculous innovations were undertaken.
No
And
more gaudy socks. Rip Malvolio.
I was gonna say, young men these days would rather grow their hair long and wear gaudy socks than die for the glory of the emperor. And that's really what's wrong with this society. And it's funny because he's like calling it a wave of hypocrisy, but of course he's obviously part of this wave of hypocrisy. You identified it earlier. He doesn't, it's not like in this book he's like, this is the coolest war of all time, this is great, this is going to make everything better. Like the war is an active problem on everyone's life that is making people have like less food, and there are less books, and it's just an imposition. But on the other hand, the actual violence in the distance is incredibly attractive to him, and the rest of the book is, the war goes on. What do you think of this, just this kind of disconnect he has from the war itself? Because he's not like being hyper nationalist about this in a way that we know the Mishima of the future would become.
No, he's not.
He's just the Joker. Like he just wants to see the world burn. Is that what's he's Mishima is the Joker. He was an actor. Why not?
I mean, it's weird. Like it's weird because he has this perception of the war as like an imposition, yes, and yet it's something that he wants to die from, yes, but not for any overwhelmingly patriotic reason. Like he has these contradictions that he fantasizes sometimes about resolving, but decides that he doesn't really have the sauce to do it, right? Like I can't help but like he has this fantasy that's pretty interesting of like somebody being served for dinner, right?
Yes.
And he says the person who falls victim here, he nicknamed this person in his fantasy B, right? Where else has he referred to people as B and A, right? There's a schoolyard game called Dirty where like B grabs A's dick and A is like, "Oh, you're so dirty. Oh, you're so." It's just some dumbass like kid thing, right?
No, it's just, yeah, locker room classic.
Yeah, B doing this to A, and then a little later in the book, what's going on? What's happening with somebody named B? He's being carved up and like eaten in his fantasy. Which, and again, he does this really weird thing of claiming, like, trying to intellectualize, like, oh, it's perfectly natural that I have homosexual tendencies and also sadistic tendencies. Like, doubt. But
Mhm.
also, like, it seems to me he's revenging himself on an aggressor in some oblique way here.
Right.
And yet, that's not how he sees his relationship to war, right? Like it's not that he doesn't want to go out and be useful, but like he doesn't see himself necessarily as the protagonist.
No, he's afraid. Like he wants to die in a bombing run, but he also doesn't want to know the bombs are coming. I mean, you talk about it. He wanted to die like a fox, like a very pretty fox that doesn't know the shot is coming. Because when the air raids happen, he's like cutting in line to get into the fucking bunkers, and he is lying to get out of the draft, but at the same time, he is craving death and he is mad at people who are saying the war should end. But then he's also mad at people who are like, no, Japan's going to come back and win this thing. He is like being an enlightened centrist about the war that says, no, the war shouldn't win either in victory or defeat, but in just some sort of like nation. I guess in his brain, the best thing would be what he would come to, what Mishima would decide later in life in a more sophisticated way is that the entire like island of Japan should have, all the islands of Japan should have just become gigantic kamikaze masses. Like, I can think of nothing else that is the conclusion of this.
Well, because that's the thing, right? It's he can't conceive of his own thoughts as normal, or if not normal, then like something that he trusts himself to work through. Like, I mean, you can really see his complexes in his perception of evil, which is merely on page 68 here. How does he phrase it? Um yeah, what we call evil is the instability inherent in all mankind, which drives man outside and beyond himself toward an unfathomable something. Not his words, but like what he considers evil, right, is mere ambition, right? Inner thoughts that drive you to act on the world, you know? And he has this constant desire to tell himself first that he is normal, and second that everything he's feeling is normal. And he can't move beyond that own that own self-criticism.
And some of that is baffling and some of that is highly relatable, right? He has this part where he's talking about having hope, right? He's looking forward to the blue skies of tomorrow, he says, and dreaming of being normal. And then I like this. He says, in time, my obsession with the idea of kissing became fixed upon a single pair of lips. Even here, I was probably inspired by nothing more than a desire to give my dreams pretensions to a nobler pedigree. As I have already suggested, although I actually experienced neither desire nor any other emotion in regard to those lips, I nevertheless tried desperately to convince myself that I did desire them. In short, I was making as primary desire something that actually was only the irrational and secondary desire of wanting to believe I desired them. I was mistaking the fierce impossible desire of not wanting to be myself for the sexual desire of a man of the world, for the desire that arises from his being himself. So he is just obsessing over his own brain, trying to make himself attracted to women, make himself, if he can't be attracted to women, attracted to women's lips. If he can't be attracted to women's lips, then attracted to the concept of being a character who is kissing someone, right? There's obviously the classic joke that people are like, what do you mean the first gay Disney character? All the Disney princes had to sing a musical number before they could kiss the girl, right? But it is like that, right? He is in this like headspace where he is hyper intellectualizing it, and when later he will have kisses and things like that. And this is the part of this book that really gets me because it is highly relatable to me as
Mm.
someone who really did try to date women, and it didn't work quite well. But you're like, well, I'm doing the thing, I'm acting out the roles, and eventually it's just going to come to me. And I think that's a deeply understandable thing in the queer experience. But unfortunately, he's like, okay, well, I guess I don't fit in. Well, maybe society's broken. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and maybe we should all die in a great perishable fire. And I'm like, no, fuck you, fuck you. Like, no.
Right,
That's
because
where he comes to.
because why? Because he can't conceive of the idea of getting an erection for the purposes of sex. Like, that's something he doubts will ever happen, and so it's just an irreparable like wrongness with him, right? That he comes to that conclusion, right? I mean, yeah, and it leads him to some bizarre fucking places. Like, I did not know that in the boy's dreams, the breasts of a woman would often float up like beautiful jellyfish rising from the sea of night. I did not know that in those dreams, the precious part of a woman would open its moist lips and keep singing a siren's melody tens of times, hundreds of times, thousands of times, eternally.
Yeah, who told him that? The fucking
It's
Saruman singing on top of it. Yeah, exactly.
like this is somebody who I struggle to believe like it would be a surprise to me if I were to find out that this guy ever shared these things with anybody before
Right.
writing this, you know?
It would be wild to be your homie to be like, "Yo, I wrote a book. Check it out." And then it's this. You're just like, "Oh, well, you did it.
And
Sure."
in yeah, and in like constantly I think this crystallizes it pretty well. My curiosity was actually purely intellectual, not far removed from the desire for knowledge, but became skillful at convincing myself that it was carnal desire incarnate. What is more, I mastered the art of delusion until I could regard myself as a truly lewd-minded person. As a result, I assumed the stylish airs of an adult, of a man of the world. I affected the attitude of being completely tired of women. So, in doing here what he thinks other people do, he ends up driving himself completely bucking fonkers.
Yes.
Like he was a Sigma before his time.
Even getting up to the point of saying literally, well, actually, it's ephebophilia. He really does. He
God
really
bless.
does like get into the definition of androphiles and ephebophiles and stuff like that.
Normal people think about
Yeah.
through like he keeps referring to Magnus Hirschfeld, and I'm skeptical just how closely he really read Hirschfeld. Not that I've read Hirschfeld, but like there has to be more to it than what he's taking away.
Yeah, he was reading like through the 1937 Google Translate. I don't know. Which is just some guy, which I guess is most translations. It's just some guy.
Yeah,
Um,
that certainly explains, you know, our the that one reaction to our three body episode.
I still thought that was a good book, even if it didn't get all the stuff across. But yeah, exactly. But like he even does the whole like, well, in ancient Greece, it was quite normal for a man to love a young, which to be fair, at the time he's saying this, he's like 18 or 19 years old, talking about like 16 to 21-year olds. So it's not like he's like a old man looking back or whatever. But like it did kill me where I was like reading this and I was like, this guy reads like, statue stuff, Greek stuff, whatever. This guy reads like what do you mean he's doing the actually it's an ephebophile? Like it really does read like an online right winger. It is remarkable.
Yeah, I think the bit about where he talks about his perception of no, it wasn't his perception of evil, but like he's trying to appear normal because like for example, he doesn't want his friends to know him as a poet because he's like, well, I've heard poets are always getting jilted by women, right? He doesn't care about what women thinks because earlier in that same paragraph, he is like, well, I consider women like the same way I consider like pencils or automobiles or brooms, right? They just don't register, right? And it's he reduces women in the process of this like severe self-possession to total inscrutability, right? Total mystique outside of, the uncompensated labor that they perform. And like we draw this conclusion because he doesn't fucking talk to women, right?
Yeah. There is a woman he does end up talking to though.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You want to
Sonoko.
talk about Sonoko?
Yeah, he tries. He really tries with her. So, your girl Sonoko. Um, as Kusano's father was
My neighbor
dead,
Sonoko. That's
yeah,
not anything.
as Kusano's father was dead, Kusano being a school friend of his, the family now consisted solely of his mother, grandmother, and three sisters. I was invited to join them around the foot warmer where they were sitting. The mother introduced me to the sister whom I had heard playing the piano at that time. Her name was Sonoko.
Dun, dun,
And
dun.
it's over for him, folks. Like, this is the love of his life, or,
Sort
you
of.
know, sort of.
And
Yeah,
and
tries to
it
be.
should be noted that that our actual writer Mishima was had a similar experience with a girl named Kuniko in real life. So, not far off. But
Hmm.
continue
Hmm.
telling us this tale, Lenore. The
Yeah,
tragic tale of Sonoko.
yeah. There's a kid at his high school, Kusano. That's her brother, who's a friend of his, and he's kind of attracted to. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. His body had already acquired that somehow dispirited pitifulness, which is the special characteristic of a new recruit. He stretched his hands out for me to see, holding them side by side. They were badly chapped with hardened dirt and oil ground into their cracks and scratches and chilblains, until they did indeed resemble the shell of a lobster. They were also damp and cold. His hands frightened me in the same way that reality did. I felt an instinctive terror of those hands. And of course, if you've been following along, you know exactly why he's scared of these hands because, oh my God, they're the hottest things that he's ever seen.
I love seeing something that looks like a lobster shell and just getting bricked up immediately.
Oh yeah, because think of all the experiences that led this guy's hands to become like tough, callous. Just imagine them, doing what they will. And he's like, instantly, Sonoko took on a new meaning for me. She was my sole armor, the sole coat of mail for my frail conscience in its struggle against these hands. Right or wrong, by fair means or foul, I told myself, you simply must love her. This feeling became, as it were, a moral obligation for me, lying even heavier in the bottom of my heart than did my sense of sin. And that's intriguing to me because like he considers himself I mean, he's doing 164 pages of like nobody can understand my twisted mind, right? He is specially like evil, he's especially bizarre, like, and because he's got these insane urges that could bubble up and overflow and out him as weird at any time, he has to seek refuge in this attraction to this girl, right? And that's what it becomes for him, like this courtship of her, right? This long con to maybe deceive other people and perhaps himself eventually, B, that he is indeed normal.
So he does the thing that I think a lot of, not I think, I know a lot of gay guys do, a lot of queer people do, and really just locks on to one person and through no fault of that person's own are like, I'm gonna pursue this person and I'm gonna be with this person and I'm gonna act like this is working for me. And it sucks for Sonoko. Like she seems very sweet and she just wants to read her little novels and like have a boyfriend. Like I like Sonoko. I mean, like, she doesn't get like a ton of character because obviously all the interiority here is in our protagonist's mind. But it 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 sucks to be her in this situation. She obviously didn't ask for this. She's just like, there's a guy giving me attention, and it's like the end of the world right now, and I'm just trying to enjoy something in some basic sense. Meanwhile, she has no idea that this is guy is using her as armor from her brother's oily hands.
Guy in the standing in the corner of the party, they don't know that their armor against my friend's only oily hands.
Yeah, everybody's just once again, just this book is just a list of things that the FBI could not torture out of me.
Well, like and like 2 pages hence, right? Like, I mean, God forbid she ever read. Do you think she ever read this book?
You must have. And to be clear, the actual woman, like he met her under the exact same circumstances. It was a guy who was a recruit that he went to school with. Like this is all just what happened,
God, I can
more or
only
less.
imagine like somebody who you were into like writing a tell-all and like you happen to come up and like you're the object of this like insane vision quest to fit in, right?
And then
Like,
imagine it's like the best-selling book of that year in your country.
well, and holy
Because that's
shit,
what
you're
this
right.
woman went through. Kuniko. I don't know her last name, but
Which again, like the pros convention of like, oh, like I was in the town of, X. I was working in the factory like run by a certain man named Y, like a certain X, a certain Y, a certain Z. It irks me a little bit because, I'm not the target audience. I don't nec It's not necessarily acceptable to me what they're talking about when they wink to their audience in that way. But, it's kind of a blessing that that people wouldn't necessarily like talk to this girl like, "Hey, like this is oddly familiar."
yeah, one presumes that like Mishima super fans were probably able to figure it out because that's what like fans have always been like. But a little harder than the age of the internet. Because these days it doesn't matter if you make like when you make fiction that's like loosely based on your real life. Like I don't know if you watched that show, Baby Reindeer, but they like people online immediately found all the things being alluded to in that and like contacted the people from the story and things. Like it's almost impossible to do that now. And I have to imagine it was still difficult then. But I will say, like in the day of the internet, if this was published, they would have found Kuniko immediately.
Oh, 100%.
And like it's nice that I hope she didn't have to deal with any too many consequences. Certainly none of the bios I read that mentioned her had anything to say about her having any like bad experiences off of this. And all said she got happily married. So, let's I hope choose to believe that.
Yeah, hopefully, right? Because, the alternative was ending up with this guy who 2 pages after meeting her is ruminating on how cool it must have been to live through a fucking air raid, right? He's talking about the Great Tokyo Air Raid at this point, which is, huge, a huge American air raid on Tokyo in March of 1945, right? And he's like, a man who died trying to rescue his sweetheart was killed not by the flames, but by his sweetheart. And it was none other than the child who murdered its own mother when she was trying to save it. The condition they had faced and fought against there, that of a life for a life, had probably been the most universal and elemental that mankind ever encounters. And this is right on the heels of meeting who in a more normal memoir would be his first love, right? I mean, this is the ethos of fascism right here, right? It's humankind reduced to apex predator. For somebody whose attraction to other people revolves around them embodying certain strengths he himself doesn't possess, right? For somebody who feels like he's constantly performing his own personality, the reduction of humanity to pure instinct and strength, and then construction of institutions to validate that and to deploy it in the name of protection of property, that has to be, I mean, the vibe alone has to be intoxicating to him.
And
And
it's
this,
for
yeah.
oh good.
Well, it's. I mean, he himself says that like love is an illusion, and it's in the context of him realizing that to him fascism is not an illusion, right? This is the one thing that's real for him is the prospect of survival at another's expense.
Right. The materiality too of the situation isn't really hitting him because he's not talking about like, obviously he's aware of what it is, but he's not talking about like these are American air raids that they're conducting with these reasons, and our government is doing this for this reason, right? There's people in the story who do have like political opinions and stuff, but to him, it's almost a force of nature. Like these bombs are as natural as rain dropping on this place. Like this is just the weather, basically.
And all the
And
more frustrating because he describes the air raids like really effectively and evocatively, which in a
yes.
more normal narrative would be cause for some rumination on, something other than his own neuroses.
Sure. And like later in this, he describes obviously the air battles over Tokyo. And every time someone sees a plane explode, they cheer, not really knowing which side it's on, but it's like, hopefully this was a good thing.
Sure,
And
that's
once
real.
again,
That's something people go through. Yeah.
exactly, it's a real experience people have. But then for him experiencing this with these things, it's like the war is horrifying but beautiful in its way. And so just this experience of in this moment, this plane having victory over another plane, this bomb having victory over a suburb, this woman having victory over her lover who tried to save her is actually, that inversion of what is right is kind of this
Well,
death
the way,
worship, like we said earlier.
and the way he describes like trying to plan a hookup with Sonoko, right? A gentle he's envisioning like gentle resistance and mutual agreement to begin hostilities.
Yeah, he sees sex as beginning hostilities, which like I got a chuckle out of because it's kind of like, oh, it's a gay guy who has to have sex. That's kind of funny. Like the like way he describes that, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of funny that he
Yeah, like
has
that
that way.
that aspect of like his remove from it, sure, yeah.
But it's also in the greater context of his experiences. It's like it's all this war and this violence around it. And it's really quite harrowing.
Until it ends and he's like, fuck, what do I do now?
Right, right. But his relationship with Sonoko goes exactly how you'd expect. When he's writing letters, he'll be right quite bold. Again, this is a moment where I felt very seen. I'm like, yeah, you can shoot those text messages and feel real, whatever. Like, as a, like just being personal, like being like a gay guy who was like in high school trying to date women, and I'm like, oh, I could text and write a text that's like real, whatever. It sounds really confident and manly or whatever. But then in person, I'm like, can we just like hang out? Like, like I'm your friend, but
It
like,
is it is remarkable how that like anticipation, I don't want to use the word obsession because it feels like a dirty word, but like it is remarkable how you build up this encounter sometimes with a person in your head and then sometimes it just becomes, yeah, as you said, like let's just hang, let's just chill, like, and that's perfectly fine.
hmm unless you're him, who is like obsessively like, I must complete my task, because he's trying to be a type of guy. He was like, a guy like me would be the type of guy who kisses somebody, and I'm gonna be that guy. Like he's like confident. Though it does make me think of the memes where it's like when you've been talking a lot of shit over like the DMs, and then you gotta show up in person, like the guy's like trembling or whatever when he shows up, which I always find funny. Like, but that is a real dynamic, and for him, obviously, it's compounded. But he talks about it, he has this blind devotion to Sonoko that he said, Ed, was him chasing, in his words, normality. He said, I had, so to speak, accepted normality as a temporary employee in the corporation of my body, which again, very fascist way of talking. I'm an employee. Normality is an employee in the corporation of my body. But he is wanting to exist as a human being without contradictions, he also says, which again is impossible. But God, it of course just sort of fizzles out. He eventually, he has experiences with her. She's expecting because it's such a tense moment and it's such a conservative culture, but it's also this place where it's like, well, the war's happening, like people are just kind of getting married. Her family's like, yo, so you gonna propose to our daughter? And his friend writes him and is like, hey, I'm not mad at you if not, but like, could you just let me know if that's your intentions? And
Did
so
or get off the pod. Yeah.
yeah, and then he's just kind of like, yeah, no, that's not really what I'm about. And he gets to kind of make up a victory in his head by saying, I'm the type of guy that makes a woman fall in love with me. And then he like sees like a woman that looks like not even close to her and like has like a heart like a panic attack in the subway, because he is not doing good.
Yeah, you can't just tell yourself you've moved on from something, you have to grapple with what it means to you. And like it or not, I do think that this meant something to him.
And at this point, the war is winding down. American planes, I mean, the atomic bombs drop. American planes drop a bunch of leaflets explaining that, in fact, there are these negotiations going on. And he looks at it and he reads. He takes a copy of it in his hands, and it says, "I'd already grasped the news. It was not the reality of defeat. It said for me alone, it meant that fearful days were beginning. It meant that whether I would or no, and despite everything that had deceived me into believing such a day would never come, the very next day I must begin that everyday life of a member of human society. How the mere words made me tremble." And he, then has a kind of the shortest chapter, chapter 4, where it's just how everyday life doesn't quite begin, but the world sort of moves towards some kind of stasis. There's a lot of conflict. It briefly glosses over his sister dying in a really, really brutal
He
sense.
spends paragraphs and paragraphs talking about his dick and 2 sentences on his sister dying.
The sentences is, my sister died. I derived a superficial peace of mind from the discovery that even I could shed a tear. And I want to make it very
Good for
clear.
you. Good for fucking you.
I
Sorry,
want to
go
make it very
ahead.
clear. This book was published 4 years after his actual sister died.
God.
His actual sister was 17 years old. Again, don't know his relationship to her, don't know how he actually felt about it. But that fucking stings right there. That is like, it is even his sister died, and this is about his relationship to whether he can feel emotion or not. And he might say, if you ask the actual Mishima, he might be like, "Well, I'm criticizing myself by the whatever." And it's like, "Yeah, but also you are uplifting this stoicism." It's weird because he's doing the thing where anytime you point out a contradiction in his thinking or a problem in his thinking, he could say, "Well, yeah, I'm being honest about that. I feel this way, so I'm aware of it." But it's like you can't just say, "Oh yeah, I'm this way, don't I suck?" and then go on acting that way and me be okay with you. You know what I mean? Which
I
is
mean,
a common online tactic as
I
well.
mean, he calls curiosity the most immoral desire a man can possess, right? Like he's not interested in examining these things at all.
He is interested in examining Sonoko one last time, though. He manages to kind of strike up a friendship with her. She's gotten married to another man, but like
This is
currently,
this is so familiar, right? This
yeah,
is like somebody who doesn't want to be the bad guy, who wants to. I mean, he says himself like, maybe my pain might be healed if I were to be clearly insulted by her just once more, right?
yeah. And she like clearly is just trying to be sweet and like Also kind of still is attracted to him very clearly. Like, so every
Yeah.
time they're hanging out, she's like, whoa, what if we did something bad? We should be careful, shouldn't we? Like inching closer to him, you know? Um, and
Unless
of course, he has no desire for that. And the book ends with her and him going to a dance club.
the cock door.
Yeah. And him looking over and seeing just this gorgeous young man. He says, a youth of 21 or 2 with coarse but regular and swarthy features. He'd taken off his shirt and stood there half naked, rewinding a belly band about his middle. The coarse cotton material was soaked with sweat and become a light gray color. He seemed to be intentionally dawdling over his task of winding and was constantly joining in the talk and laughter of his companions, right? And then a moment, and it goes on, talks about the hot mass of his torso, et cetera, et cetera. But then moments later, he says, I'd forgotten Sonoko's existence. I was thinking of but one thing, of his going out onto the streets of high summer just as he was, half naked, and getting into a fight with a rival gang, of a sharp dagger cutting through that belly band, piercing that torso, of that soiled belly band beautifully dyed with blood, of his gory corpse being put on an improvised stretcher made of a window shutter and brought back here. So yeah, and then Sonoko's like, "Hey, there's only 5 minutes left for us to hang out." She says right next to him. Like it's very sad, and also just I did like get a little bit of a chuckle. He kept saying belly band. I don't know why, but that was a funny little term to me. But this is just it's really harrowing, and he ends up kind of at the end, she asks him, "Hey, have you ever had sex before?" Like, I don't know why she asked, probably because she wants to fuck him. And he's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "With whom?" And he says, "Please don't ask me." And at the very end, it says, Sonoko and I looked at our wristwatches almost at the same instant. It was time. As I got up, I stole one more glance towards those chairs in the sun. The group had apparently gone to dance, and the chairs stood empty in the blazing sunshine. Some sort of beverage had been spilled on the tabletop and was throwing back glittering, threatening reflections. And so it ends with a
Scene.
glittering, threatening reflection, and that's it.
Yeah. No, like he has a threatening reflection, and that's all he sees, right? He doesn't see what something authentically is. He doesn't see what he himself authentically is because he's convinced that he's some aberration that he'll never truly understand. A.
Mhm.
And B, like I noticed, like we didn't really get into his prose passages. I mean, we did, but we didn't get into his prose passages too much about like nature, right? He does have a real eye for nature. He has a you know he has, even as he sees adversariality and evil in his surroundings, right? He describes flowers as vivid colors tinged with malevolence, right? There's a very evocative descriptive style that he has of the sea, the sky, flowers around him, and they leave the dance hall through what? Through an archway of artificial out of season flowers, right? It jives with his passion for nature as, he's somewhere he sees how cheap and false this like relationship that he's like sort of tying up in a bow is, A. And what does he then see? He sees this big tough guy who he's attracted to with a flower tattooed on his head, right? He sees the perfect unity of nature and of the savage human form. And he's like, yeah, this is who I am, and this is who I'll always be. And this is the point, I think, where I'm like, God damn it. Like, he's never going to move beyond this specific point in his life, beyond this specific ball of complexes. I mean, the way I'm sure it's unintentional, but like he mentions like vulgar blues playing, and I'm like, oh yeah, so like this is like the fascist begins moment, right? The
Yeah.
idea of degenerate music transcends cultures. It's the moment that he realizes he can never fool himself into thinking he's normal.
Right? And he decides that, and he doesn't decide, something is wrong with society. If anything, any reformist element in society is something that makes him insecure because he knows that would serve him in some way that he doesn't want to be served because he has chosen this exile, right? Obviously society exiled him, but he's like clinging to that. That becomes part of his identity and it becomes part of the ethos of his rejection of society right back. And instead wants to return to some former time that would also not be good for him either, right? Also, he would not be normal there, but he thinks, oh, I'm bad because of my time, or oh, I'm unhappy because of my time, or oh, I don't have purpose because of that. And so he is going to then, for this book, be greatly rewarded financially by society with praise, with literary accolades and with all kinds of job offers and stuff. And he's going to spend his rest of his life here or deteriorating further until he gets to the point where he's writing My Friend Hitler, which is, again, hard not to laugh at, but like it's what he was doing.
Well,
And
that's the thing,
it
because
sucks.
it's yeah, it's insularity. It's coming to terms with like this permanent alienation from what other people consider normal and tasteful. Again, not that you have to be normal and tasteful, but not in that fucking way, right? Like it's. I mean, it's I mean, if I sound like I'm reacting particularly viscerally to this, it's in no small part because, you know, there's bits and pieces of this person in whom I see someone I used to be, not,
Mhm.
get your jokes out about like trans women with fascist phases. Obviously, I didn't have that, right? But like, I know a little of what it is to go through life at various points with feelings of superfluity, rudderlessness, this sense that having missed out on some experience or opportunity or capability, you're just waiting to die and perhaps to be put to some better use along the way, right? Like, I mean, if you don't struggle actively with that emptiness and find solace in a community of some type to be reflected and uplifted by, right? If you construct these vast essentialist fantasias to disappear into, you know, there but for the grace of God, right?
Right. So ultimately, what I guess my takeaway from this book is, first of all, reactionaries can make good art every now and then. A lot of times they don't, but every now and then, it's not left behind. It's something like this that actually hits. It also is. I think there's some great takeaways just about like because you identify with a certain community, right? LGBT community or what have you, uh, that doesn't automatically put you in, a progressive place that can take you in a very bad direction.
Again,
And
Ernst Röhm, like
right, exactly. And we need to actually keep this in mind when we live in a society that treats, minorities of different types, sexual, ethnic, etc., in certain ways that it can actually lead to really reactionary and dark places for certain figures, which we see these sort of examples of like these figureheads of that are like kind of held up as the puppets of the right wing. These
mhm.
people exist. This is how they are formed. This is how they feel. This is a guidebook in how these people are forged in a lot of ways. And I guess the last thing I'll say that I have on this book really strongly is I think there is something ultimately kind of, I hate to say comforting, but comforting in the idea that these guys have kind of this sort of this through line of right wing ideology has not changed significantly over like the last century. And like we can joke about like, yeah, he's like doing trad cath Groyper shit in 1949. And like that's funny, but also like there is something like, okay, ultimately these people are stuck pursuing a past that does not exist. They are stuck in this endless cycle of self-hatred. They can never build anything that lasts. They can never build anything stable. They can never develop upon their own ideology. So they can destroy, they can dismantle, they can hurt, but ultimately they're never going to build anything that is going to be sustainable, anything that's going to be consistent. There is never going to be a fascism that is able to reign for 1,000 years because it's not what it's set up to do. And I think if you even got Mishima to be really honest with yourself, he understood that as well, which is why he talks about the kamikaze so much, right? And I think that can be encouraging to those of us who want to build a better world, not because that danger isn't there, not because that damage isn't ever present, but because these people will not learn, they will not adapt, they will not grow. And we will continue to do that until we win, until there are no young Mishimas growing up feeling alienated, feeling like they're rejects, feeling like they're disgusting, being raised in these kind of households and coming to these conclusions. And if there's anything I can walk away from at this is I feel I obviously this guy fuck this guy, but also I feel very bad for this guy, and we got a lot of work to do. And there was a lot of work to do then, and there's a lot of work to do now, but I know we can do it.
And in all the ways that these people cannot, because we again we seek solace and we seek strength in our communities, and in our diversity and in the conversations and the relationships that can arise therefrom and how these things interact and how these things change. And you nailed it perfectly. These people do not change. The core of their ideology, the core of their identity is being permanently aggrieved, in being permanently alienated and other, right? And not other in the sense of, yeah, this is who I uniquely am, and like I celebrate this identity alongside others. No, like this guy is other in the sense of like I have to constantly lash out and violently defend myself from this constant encroachment on my dark deviant corner of the like this corner of the world, impervious to any kind of growth, right? These it's why these people have to posture as weak and persecuted even as they seize the levers of state power and build death camps, right? They have a stake in being permanently aggrieved, and it's not because of who they are innately. It's because of the narrative that they've chosen. It's because of the mask that has become their face.
And to end this on a slightly lighter note, I got two things. One, next week we're going to be talking to Alchemist. We have a really exciting guest on, so be ready for that. And two, female to male transition Mishima be like Confessions of a Mask, MASC. Am I right?
You
Have a good
are.
one, everybody.